Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Before I get into today's review, do want to remind you if you enjoy the Gaming Gang and you'd like to become a supporter, we've got a couple of ways for you to do so. First, by way of a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can also become a member of our Patreon, and you'll find links down in the show notes. Of course, don't forget, hang with the gang over on Discord. You will also find an invite to our Discord server down in those show notes. So today I am going to be reviewing Nightmare on the Necropolis Express from Stygian Fox. This is an adventure for Hudson Brand, Inquiry Agents of the Obscure, which means it's for Call of Cthulhu and Cthulhu by Gaslight. This is written by Glenn Owen Barris, and the 50-page hardcover with PDF is available by way of DriveThruRPG for $19.95. If you want to grab just the PDF alone, you can do so for $9.95. Having said all that, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got Nightmare on the Necropolis Express. A few things to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, the fine folks over at Stygian Fox were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. It's important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a really good feel for what you're going to find inside. And then lastly, this is an adventure. So if you're a player and your keeper has picked this up, maybe they haven't started running it yet, or maybe they're talking about picking this up, there are going to be some spoilers, so you have been warned. Now, of course, if your keeper is considering getting this adventure, let them know about this review. That way they can approach Nightmare on the Necropolis Express and make a far more informed buying decision. First thing we're going to do is take a peek at the credits page. We'll give credit where credit is due to the folks who brought this to life. If you're curious about the production quality, very solid throughout. Paper stock's nice. This is printed by DriveThruRPG. And as far as the artwork and the images, a lot of it is going to be public domain because we are talking about something from the Victorian era. So we will have some photography. We do have some artwork, which will show the abomination at the end, as well as some of our NPCs. So it's not all public domain photography by any stretch. So if you're not overly familiar with British history, during the 19th century, the city of London essentially ran out of places to bury the dead. They call it the burial crisis. And what had happened was all of these bodies had been interred in churchyards because that was what was normally done. And it got to the point where bodies were being buried on top of one another, and the actual level of the earth was raised because so many bodies were being interred in these churchyards, in these small cemeteries. And of course, heavy rains would come and the bodies would bubble up. And then there was a cholera outbreak, which killed thousands, which made everything worse as far as the burial crisis. So the powers that be came up with the idea of creating a cemetery outside of London, which would be able to inter the dead for hundreds of years. At least that's what their thinking was, because of course the city of London had grown so much, it just could not keep up with the demands of the dead. So of course, in order to move the caskets to this cemetery, they actually needed to come up with a train line, and that is where we get the Necropolis Express. So the Necropolis Express was a real train. The Necropolis Railroad actually existed. In fact, it existed through the 1940s when, during the bombing during World War II, much of the railway was destroyed and then it was just shut down. So what's going on here is various different bodies are being dug up from all of these different areas of London, and they're being reinterred in Brookwood Cemetery. That's the new cemetery. So what's going on here is this group of workers, they are digging up bodies, and a lot of times they're just digging up remains that are all intermingled. They're not necessarily in coffins or caskets. And then they are being reinterred in Brookwood in mass graves. So what happens here is one of the workers finds a golden amulet and decides, well, okay, I'm going to pocket this. And the workers who are actually digging up the graves and reinterring them in Brookwood work on the Necropolis Express. So what starts happening is every night around midnight, there are strange goings on. There is a sense of an evil entity present on the train. The investigators are brought in to look into what's going on. And of course, there are some locations that they'll go and they'll check things out. Like they're going to go and meet with the various different workers as they are removing these bodies from mass graves to load them up to take on the express. And then, of course, the big highlight is going to be the showdown on the train, because what's happened is that amulet belonged to a sorcerer who now has returned because they want the amulet back. Pretty interesting stuff going on here. It is a relatively short adventure. I would say it would probably take maybe a session and a half at most in order to wrap this up. This should be a lot of fun, very interesting. I like the NPCs are presented very nicely. There is a nice variety of NPCs as well. Even the NPC who has pocketed this amulet, they're not a bad person. They just found this amulet while they were digging up the graves, and they figured, well, it's going to do more good for me than it will just putting it into a coffin. So all in all, like the adventure, this should be pretty cool. And one of the things I love about Call of Cthulhu is how history gets incorporated in many of the published adventures, and how easy it is to tie historical events into the goings on of your campaigns. That has always been, to me, one of the huge selling points of Call of Cthulhu. So that's an idea about the adventure itself. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts as well as my review score. I really like Nightmare on the Necropolis Express. I definitely appreciate the way Glenn Owen Barris has tied in real history, such as the Necropolis Railroad and Necropolis Express and Brookwood Cemetery, into the proceedings. Very, very cool. It is a short adventure. I would probably look to expand it out a little bit. Maybe I would include a royal ghost who maybe they're haunting Brookwood Cemetery because they've been interred in a mass grave with non-royalty. Maybe they're a little pissed off. Maybe kind of lead my players to think maybe the two are associated, they're related. The weird goings on the Necropolis Express, as well as the ghost, but then, of course, make them separate. Just to, I don't want to say to pad out the adventure. It's just the adventure as written is pretty short, which is fine. I just think you could have a lot more fun with the whole premise of the cemetery and the Necropolis Express, and not just utilize it for a real quick adventure. But all in all, this is a very solid, fun adventure that I think your players will enjoy. So on a scale of 0 to 10, I give Nightmare on the Necropolis Express an 8 out of 10. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell because it'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. And of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you very much for watching. And until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.